let's dive into one of the most intense and dramatic stories in ancient scripture. We're going to trace the path of how humanity went from a single, tragic murder between two brothers to a world so full of wickedness that its own creator felt the need to wash it all away. And this really gets us to the big, central question of this whole story, doesn't it? Why would a God who is all-powerful ever feel grief or even regret over the very world he made? It's a question that really gets to the heart of what's going on here. So where does this whole downward spiral begin? Well, not with kings or armies or anything like that. It all starts in the most intimate setting possible, a family. This is the story of the first kids on Earth and the very first big sin after Adam and Eve left the garden. Okay, so you've got two brothers, Cain, the farmer, and Abel, the shepherd. They both bring an offering to God, but only Abel's gets the thumbs up. Now, the key thing to understand here, according to the source material, isn't what they offered, veggies versus meat. It was the attitude behind it. Abel brought the very best he had, a sign of real faith. Cain, well, his offering just didn't have that same heart. And that rejection made him furious. And this is such a critical moment. God actually steps in and gives Cain this incredibly direct warning. He doesn't just yell at him for being angry. He explains temptation itself. He's basically saying, look, sin is like a predator waiting to pounce. It wants you, but you have to be the one in charge. It was a real chance for Cain to get a grip before things went too far. But he doesn't listen. He kills his brother. And when God confronts him, he spits back with one of the most famous lines ever. Am I my brother's keeper? It's this defiant lie that just seals the deal. His punishment isn't death, though. It's a life of exile. He's cursed to be a wanderer, never feeling at home, always disconnected from everyone and everything. And here's where the problem just explodes. See, Cain's sin doesn't just end with him. It acts like a seed that gets planted and it grows and multiplies through his family line, eventually corrupting the whole world and creating this massive divide in humanity. So you end up with these two totally different family trees. On one side, you have the line of Cain, which just gets more and more violent and arrogant. It gets so bad that his descendant, a guy named Lamech, is literally bragging about murder and is the first to take multiple wives. But then, there's another path, the line of Seth, who is Adam's son born after Abel died. This line is all about hope. They're the first people we're told began to call on the name of the Lord. And here's something that's kind of mind-blowing to think about. How these stories even survived. These people lived for an incredibly long time. Think about it. Adam was still alive for 56 years of the life of Noah's father, Lamech. He could have told him firsthand what the Garden of Eden was like. And Noah himself lived long enough to overlap with Abraham for 58 years. He could have given Abraham a direct eyewitness account of the flood. History wasn't some long game of telephone, it was passed down directly. So, as the world gets more crowded, the scripture brings in this key group, the sons of God. Now, there are a few ways to interpret this, but the source material for this explainer is pretty clear. It identifies them as that righteous family line we just talked about, the descendants of Seth who are following God. And what happens? They start to intermarry with the daughters of men. And you can probably guess who they are. They're identified as the descendants from Cain's ungodly, violent lineage. This mixing of the good line with the bad line is shown as the real tipping point, the moment where wickedness just went completely viral. Right around this time, you also have the Nephilim showing up. The text describes them as these huge, powerful, warrior-type people, giants or mighty heroes who were famous back then. And they're often linked to the violence and corruption that was taking over everything. All of this corruption and violence leads to a major shift in the story. We go from watching what humans are doing to seeing God's emotional reaction to it all. And honestly, the tone becomes one of deep, deep sorrow. This is one of the most powerful and humanizing descriptions of God in the entire text. It's not just, divine anger at people breaking the rules. The language here is about profound grief, about a heart that is literally pained and deeply troubled by what the world he made had become. So it's really important to understand what the text means when it says God regretted creating humanity. The source clarifies this isn't God saying, whoops, I made a mistake. No, it's what theologians call an anthropomorphism. It's using a human emotion, regret, to try and help us humans understand the sheer depth of God's divine sorrow and disappointment with our choices. But even in the middle of all this grief, judgment doesn't come down instantly.
God hits the pause button. He provides a window of 120 years. This number represents a final period of grace, one last chance for humanity to maybe, just maybe, turn things around before the flood.
So, in a world that is just completely consumed by evil, there's this one guy, Noah, who is described as righteous. And because he's faithful, he's given a job that is, well, it's almost impossible to even imagine. Build a boat that can save a remnant of life from the end of the world.
To really get a handle on the insane scale of this project, you just have to look at the numbers. The ark was supposed to be about 137 meters long. That's 450 feet. I mean, that is just massive. We're talking about a structure longer than an American football field, including the end zones. Can you imagine the engineering required for something like that?
And what about how much it could carry? Well, estimates put its internal volume at the same as about 526 modern-day train cars.
Which means you could fit something like 50,000 animals in there, plus all the food and supplies they'd need to survive. It was basically a gigantic, self-contained, floating ecosystem built to preserve life through a catastrophe.
After those 120 years, Noah's incredible work is finally done, and the time for judgment arrives. The story hits this massive cataclysmic climax with a flood that's designed to cleanse the entire earth and start everything over.
And the event is laid out in very clear stages. First, Noah's family and all the animals have 7 days to get on board the ark. Then, the floodgates open. The rain pours for 40 days and nights, and water bursts from the ground. But even after that, the water continues to cover the earth for a total of 150 days before it even starts to go down. So what was the ultimate point of all that devastation? Well, the text frames it not as a final angry curse, but as a severe, painful blessing for restoration. The goal wasn't just to destroy evil, but to wipe the slate totally clean so a new beginning was even possible. And that leaves us with this final, massive question to think about. The story is just packed with sin, with deep sorrow, and incredible survival. But when you get to the heart of it, was the Great Flood a final, terrible end? Or was it the violent, heartbreaking birth of a new beginning?